Oh, wait, hang on. And it's Anthony will chop this part off, but it's always game day in Buffalo, right?
Yeah, that's the name
That's
of the podcast. Yeah.
that's the pod. Okay, cool. All right, we'll do it in 3, 2, 1. Hey, everybody, welcome in. It is a Thursday edition of the Utopia Football Podcast. Of course, you know Thursday is guest day on the podcast, and with the big news with the Texans yesterday, had to get a Buffalo person on to talk about the Stefon Diggs trade, and Matt Bove of It's Always Game Day in Buffalo joining me right now on the podcast. And Matt, it's great to have you on. I appreciate you making time. I guess just what was the reaction here in Houston yesterday was very celebratory, but I did a lot of listening in on Buffalo content yesterday, podcasts and radio and whatnot. And it feels like the mood is very, very different in Buffalo. I guess if you could just categorize kind of what the reaction was yesterday in Buffalo to the trade of Stefon Diggs.
The opposite of celebratory. I think everybody was shocked when the move initially happened, just because Stefon Diggs has been such a fan favorite, such a focal point for this team for the last 4 seasons. He has been the second most popular player, or probably the second best player that they have had. I don't think anybody thought that this story was going to end now. I think we all kind of thought it was going to happen after one more season. So for the Bills to part ways with him the way they did, shocked immediately. Everybody's like, what the heck is going on? And then as the day went on, I think it started to make a little bit more sense, but there are still a lot of questions here in Buffalo of why was this the move that was made and why did it happen right now? Now they don't have a number 1 wide receiver, and they kind of don't have a number 2 wide receiver. So they got a lot of things that they got to figure out.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by the Buffalo side of this thing, Matt. As you can imagine, we were chopping up the Texans side of it quite a bit on my morning show today on Sports Radio 610, but the Buffalo side of it is fascinating. And I do want to get into that, but I think if from our perspective, if we're looking at this trade and what the best case and worst case scenario is, the best case is the Texans may have just created the greatest show on turf again with Diggs and Nico Collins and CJ Stroud and Tank Dell. The worst case scenario is what I want to talk to you about, because there's both perception and reality of what Stefon Diggs has been behind the scenes in Buffalo, particularly over the last year or so, social media, his brother, things like all those things where it feels like, okay, at the very least, this guy has been somewhat of a distraction. Can you clarify or give us some insight as to what exactly kind of Stefon Diggs is behind the scenes and has been behind the scenes in Buffalo?
An ultra competitive person who I think wears his heart on his sleeve, and sometimes that rubs people the wrong way just because he only has one speed, and that's full speed. And when things don't go well, then that's when there's a problem. Now, it's hard to say things did not go well. Over the course of the last 4 seasons, he's been the most targeted receiver in the NFL. He's got the most catches. He's got the most touchdowns. Like, it was well in Buffalo. But for some reason, there was just always this friction behind the scenes, and it always became a distraction. I don't think that's going to be the case in Houston, because he's at a point in his career where he's got a couple more years probably as a prime player. And then after that, he's going to be more of a secondary role. He's going into a team that has other guys there. So he does not have to be the entire offense. Tank Dell can do that. Nico Collins can do that. Like, he is going into kind of a perfect setting for him to have success and for the team to have success. The thing is, though, there's going to be cryptic tweets. There's going to be moments when you wonder, is this guy happy? But for the Texans, it's worth it because it first was only a second-round pick, and you're in the window that you need to win right now. It's basically the same thing the Bills did when they added Stefon Diggs. They wanted to make sure they took advantage of a quarterback on a rookie contract. The Texans are being smart by doing this, and it only costing them a second-round pick. I think this is a win for the Texans. Could it go bad? Yeah, but I don't see that happening for at least a couple of years.
Yeah, and I think and a couple of things, you just gave me a lot to unpack with you there. So I think the very end where you said, I think that's all the Texans are looking to get out of Stefon Diggs, if I had to guess, is a couple of years. He's 30, 31 years old now, so he's getting to that age for wide receivers. I think if they get 2 good years out of Stefon Diggs, I think the Texans I think they're laughing. It's interesting you bring up Nico Collins and Tank Dell, and that's something I've been curious about with Stefon Diggs. Like, he's been the clear-cut number 1 guy in Buffalo there for 4 years now, and he's done really, really well. He's put up huge numbers. Nico Collins put up huge numbers last year. Tank Dell was on his way to putting up huge numbers before he broke his leg in the Denver game. How do you think Stefon Diggs will operate in an environment where he may still end up being the leading receiver on this team, but he's going to be sharing the football, I would imagine, a lot. There's a lot more mouths to feed, I guess, is my perception, at least, compared to what his role was with the Buffalo Bills.
I think it'll be more like the role he had in Minnesota before he came to Buffalo, where it was him and Adam Thielen as kind of the top two guys. Then when he comes to Buffalo, he becomes the clear-cut number one, and that's when the target share starts to look like 150, 160 targets a year, which is absolutely outrageous. He's not going to get that there. Stefon Diggs, though, can still be a really reliable, even though he might not get the most targets, even though he might not finish with the best stats or the most yards or whatever it is. I still think that for the next year, when CJ Stroud needs a play, he's probably going to be looking for Stefon Diggs. And that's how he was here too. When Josh Allen was in trouble, the first guy he looked for was number 14. So this is now an added security blanket for a really good young quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, and CJ has built a rapport with Dalton Schultz at tight end. It's exciting for Texan fans. I guess DeMeco Ryans, when he was at the Combine a few weeks ago, was asked, what do you look for in a receiver? Because I think even with Nico Collins and Tank Dell, Texans fans have been looking for them to supplement that position because they're not that deep after those two guys. And the description he gave was there was nothing about size or speed or physicality. His thing, the one trait he said, we look for separators, guys that can separate and guys that can win on third down. And it sounded like, honestly, Matt, it sounded like we played the audio of that today on my show, and I listened to it. I said, that sounds like an answer you could give. That same cut you could play if you said, what do you like about Stefon Diggs? Is that accurate? Like, is that his superhero power, his ability to just get open and move the chains?
Yes, but that power has become a little less strong, if that makes any sense, over the course of the last couple of years. I still think he's a really good player. The thing that Stefon Diggs does better than probably anybody in the league is his route running. His route running is so crisp that it gets him open on the exact same route with one of his peers. Because when he goes and he runs a big, deep curl, he is in and out of that break so fast that it gives that extra split-second window where he is open. So, yes, that is kind of one of the things that he does so well. But when he slipped up in the second half of last season, we did not see that separation. Now, there's a lot of layers to this, though. Partially, it's because the Bills had a new offensive coordinator and their identity on offense kind of changed. So maybe it was just that there was a new offensive coordinator and they didn't know how to fully use Stefon Diggs. I still think that he's going to be a really, really good player for Houston, but I don't think he's quite the separator route runner that he was 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, that makes sense just in terms of the guys on the wrong side of 30 now. And I guess as someone, you watched every snap of Buffalo football last year, so I'm curious your thoughts on this. My take on it, I mean, I watched a few Buffalo games, obviously, but my take on it, just from a common sense standpoint, for those who are saying like, well, there's people out there saying, oh, you traded for a washed up receiver. Look at his stats the last 10 games of the year. No. Look at what he didn't do in the playoffs and this and that. The guy had a slew of 100-yard games to start the season. And then, as you point out, there was a change in offensive coordinator there. I just don't feel like somebody all of a sudden gets washed in the middle of a season. Like if somebody comes back from the offseason and they're just not the same guy, the next year, then so be it. But like it sounds to me like what you're saying is a lot of the reason for his dip in productivity may have had to do with the circumstances around him more so than maybe his physical abilities dropping off.
Yeah, I think that their offense in Buffalo in the second half of the season switched to it was not ever a ground game focus, but they ran the ball more. They were looking for short passes that were going to kind of rack up the yards after catch. And then they were trying to take shots down the field when they had them. And his numbers would have looked a heck of a lot better if Josh and him didn't miss on a couple big plays. And it didn't just happen in the playoff game. The last play that everybody here in Buffalo is going to remember was a 70-yard in-the-air throw from Josh Allen to Stefon Diggs that went through his hands that would have given them the lead in the final minutes of the game that they didn't connect on. But similar things happened for the last 5 or 6 games that they played, where sometimes it was Allen threw it a little bit too far, or sometimes Allen wasn't able to get that extra step. So I think it was a change in philosophy, but I also think that he is just so versatile that Houston will be able to use him in a lot of ways. The one thing I will say, though, for Texans fans is I would not expect this to be a guy who's going to come in and just burn people down the field. That's not his game. So he is a player who is perfect for those short to intermediate throws. He can still stretch the field, but if that's what he's being brought in to do, I think you would have more success using Tank Dell and Nico Collins in that role. But that's what they're good at, it seems like. So that's why this could be a really nice fit for them.
Yeah, good stuff. So I'm curious from the Buffalo side, Matt. I was listening in on some, as I mentioned earlier, listening in on some Buffalo content yesterday, and it sounds like maybe a big reason why Stefon Diggs did get moved, or maybe one reason why now was the time, is that so much leadership left the building in this offseason with Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde, Tre'Davious White, Mitch Morse, all that maybe that degree of leadership leaving the building, that there's a better chance you might get a worse version of Stefon Diggs and a better version of Stefon Diggs. Do you think that's a fair categorization?
I think they were fed up. I think that they can't say that, but I think they thought it was becoming more of a distraction, and the productivity on the field was not going to be worth the distraction, because we did see the slip in the second half of the season. Now, that does not mean that he's not a good player, but here in Buffalo, the Bills have always been in a division with Tom Brady for the last 25 years, and with the Patriots and with Bill Belichick. And Belichick used to always say, it's better to get rid of a player a year too soon than a year too late. And I think for the Bills, that's kind of the mindset that they took with Stefon Diggs. Like, are we a better team with him on the field next year? Absolutely. But what do we do after next year when we know we're going to eventually have to move on from him? So I think that was part of it. I also think the Bills are just doing it's like a very concerted effort for them to get younger and cheaper. They want to be with all their prime players under 30, and they want to have all of their contracts very manageable, so they can kind of take another kick at the can at really going all in like they did while Josh Allen is still in the prime of his career. So I think there's a lot of layers to it. It was also interesting. I mean, Bill's general manager, Brandon Beane, was asked, did he ask for a trade? And he did not answer that, which tells me a lot. Him not answering if he asked for a trade makes me think, well, maybe he did ask for a trade. So I think that the Bills didn't have a ton of options here and just had to take the best thing that they got offered.
Interesting. Yeah, Diggs was down here a couple of weeks ago for a celebrity softball game. Travis Scott, noted Houston rapper, had a celebrity softball game at Minute Maid Park where the Astros play. CJ Stroud played in it. There were pictures that surfaced of Stefon Diggs and Tank Dell kind of sitting on top of the dugout, just chatting with each other the whole time. Mm-hmm. It makes you wonder, how much legal recruiting went on. Players are allowed to talk to each other about anything, so it makes you wonder maybe how much of the seeds were planted. I know ultimately it's the Bills' choice as to where they send him, but the players do have some degree of control in these things, I guess. So it does make you wonder, if that was a part of the getting comfortable phase for Houston here.
I thought if the Bills first off, I didn't think the Bills were ever going to move him, just because the fact that they're keeping a player on their roster to make $31 million this year who's not going to play for them tells you a lot that they did not really want him to be here. But I thought that if they were ever going to move him, they would send him to a team in the NFC that wasn't good. It'd be like, hey, man, go play for the Arizona Cardinals. Congratulations. Good luck, and we wish you all the best. So the fact that they sent him to Houston tells me that there wasn't a lot out there. Maybe the second-round pick from Houston, even though it seems a little underwhelming, was far and away better than the other options that they had. The second-round pick, when the deal first, was announced here in Buffalo, people, were shocked that they moved on from Diggs, and also shocked that the return was only a second-round pick. But I think as you look at it a little bit further, you're like, well, Keenan Allen only got a fourth, and Amari Cooper a couple years ago only got a fifth. So when you look at other players at that age, it's like, okay, well, a second-round pick, it's not great, but it's also probably better than anything else they would have gotten.
Yeah, I feel like the league has kind of smartened up too on overpaying draft capital for guys, and this is a different category than Diggs, but I look at the L'Jarius Sneed trade. Mm-hmm. The Chiefs got a third-round pick for him. He's one of the best cornerbacks in football. He's getting paid like one of the best cornerbacks in football. There was that period of time, and we feel it acutely here in Houston, the Laramie Tunsil trade where the Texans traded 2 firsts and a second for Laramie Tunsil while he's still on his rookie deal, and the Diggs trade is similar, a first, a fifth, a sixth, all the stuff you guys traded for Diggs. There's Jalen Ramsey, there's Khalil Mack, there's all these trades. And I think the league is smartening up about, okay, I'm getting banged twice here. I'm getting hit for high draft capital for the right to, and oftentimes overpay a guy. I feel like the league's just kind of smartened up on what the calibration of draft capital should be in trades.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's now the conversation that we're having here in Buffalo, now that we're 24 hours removed from this trade. But it's like, okay, how do you replace Stefon Diggs? And immediately people will say, oh, well, what about Brandon Ayuk? He might be available. What about T. Higgins? But it's the same thing. It's like, well, if you're going to give up a big asset to go get those players and then you have to pay them, it might just be smarter to kind of roll the dice in the draft. And I know you're not getting a sure thing, but at least you're getting somebody on a rookie contract. And Josh Allen is, honestly, as far as quarterbacks are concerned, maybe besides like CJ Stroud and Jordan Love, the best bargain in football because he's like the 10th or 11th paid quarterback because he signed his extension several years ago, but he still makes a ton of money. So they need guys who can play for cheap. So they don't really have it in them right now to go out and get one of those guys. The Texans have the luxury of having that space and having that flexibility because they got CJ Stroud for super cheap right now.
Yep, absolutely. You got to take advantage of that window for sure. Okay, so a couple things before I let you go on the Buffalo side of this. Let's talk about, that was the other thing I heard in listening in on Buffalo and eavesdropping on Buffalo yesterday was it feels like it's a lock now that, excuse me, that at 28, the Bills are going to take a wide receiver. Do you feel similarly to some of the people I heard talking about this yesterday?
Oh, I don't think it's a lock that they take a receiver at 28. I think it's a lock that they take a receiver in the first round, and I don't think it's going to be at 28. I think they're going to use the second round pick they got from Houston and maybe even something else and try and move on up. I know it sounds ridiculous. I will not be at all surprised if they trade multiple first round picks and one of their second round picks and try and really get up there. Like, I wonder if they absolutely love one of those top three guys and they're like, listen, we need to give Josh Allen a stud for the next 5 years on a cost controlled contract. Let's go do it. So while I think that maybe that's a little less likely than them doing a small move up to get a Brian Thomas or to get, an AD Mitchell, I definitely think they're taking one in the first round, and I am almost expecting them to trade up. Brandon Beane in his 6 drafts has traded up 4 times. So it's not something he shies away from doing.
No, Casario's the same way here. That's interesting. So where do you think, because I'm sure you've looked at this, every big board and every mock draft, especially now that the draft is going to be so crucial to you guys at that position. Yeah. The big three are obviously Harrison, Rome Odunze, and Malik Neighbors of LSU. Where do you think, like, what's the lowest pick that you think the Bills would have to move up to get in the mix for those 3 guys?
Well, I think any of them you would need to get into the top 10. I think the 2 teams that they could probably target, it would cost a ton, but if the Bears want to add a bunch of assets to try and surround Caleb Williams with a lot of talent, it's kind of a conversation of like, what's more valuable, a Rome Odunze or another first round pick, and then more things that we can add. So I would circle the Bears at 9, and I would circle the Giants at 6. The Giants is especially interesting because their general manager, Joe Shane, was the assistant general manager here in Buffalo with Brandon Beane, and they are incredibly good friends. So they're kind of in that same position of like, well, what's more valuable to you, adding a wide receiver at 6 or adding one at 28, picking up another first round pick and probably another second round pick so you can kind of piece together those holes, because those teams in the top 10, they got a lot of things they got to figure out. The Bills, they could get away with giving up multiple picks to try and go take a big swing on a wide receiver.
So do you think people in Buffalo will be disappointed if they're still sitting there at 28 picking on draft night? Is this an expectation now in Buffalo that they're going to be aggressive in the draft after this trade?
I guess it'll depend on who's there. I think we've talked about wide receiver so much. Before even the Diggs trade happened, it always felt like it was going to be wide receiver. Now it's like definitely going to be wide receiver. I think it's going to depend on who's there. I feel like from the experts that follow the draft, there's kind of a clear-cut 3. And then after that, there's another 2 or 3 guys that are all in that mix. I think if the Bills stay at 28 and they can get one of those guys in like the 4 to 6 range, then people would probably be okay, because then it would at least give them the capital that they have to go address other things. But as long as they get a receiver, I think people are going to be happy, but it's not just going to be a receiver. It's going to be, they need to draft multiple receivers, or they need to draft a receiver and go trade for somebody or go sign for somebody. I just don't see a world where this team is rolling into next season with a drafted receiver, Curtis Samuel, and Khalil Shakir as their top 3 guys. I just don't see that happening.
That's crazy to me. Like, it feels like there's got to be something coming in on the back end here with the Bills. Last thing before I let you go, what are your expectations now for the Bills this year? Assuming they do things in the draft that people are enthusiastic about, and they do what's expected, barring any big earth-changing moves. What is this team right now, especially in an AFC East that gets Aaron Rodgers back with the New York Jets?
I watched Josh Allen get a team to the playoffs with John Brown and Cole Beasley as their wide receivers and with Devin Singletary as their running back when they lost to Houston in the wild card game in overtime in 2019, and a game that they probably should have won. So I understand the national narrative out there is that, like, Stefon Diggs made Josh Allen. He certainly helped him get from good quarterback to elite quarterback. but I'm still giving the Bills a chance as long as they got number 17 on their roster. I really do believe, maybe I'm looking at this with rose-colored glasses, I think he's the second best quarterback in the league. I think he can go toe-to-toe with anybody. I still give them the edge in the division just because I like him more than I like Rodgers at his age coming off an injury, way more than I like Tua as a player. I think that they're going to not be as dominant as they've been. I mean, they've won 4 straight division titles, so they've really kind of had a stranglehold on this division. I don't think it's going to be comfortable. I think it's going to be similar to what we saw this year, where they're fighting and clawing all the way to the end. I mean, they went to week 18 this year with a chance of missing the playoffs. They ended up winning and getting the 2 seed. So I don't necessarily think it's a lock that they win the division, but I would be really surprised if they're not at least a playoff team. And I've kind of always felt this way about the Bills. It's like, just get into the playoffs, and I think Josh Allen gives you a chance to win any game. I mean, he walked off the field in he walked off the field in Kansas City with a lead with 13 seconds left on the road, and they still lost the game. So they scored more points against the Chiefs defense in the playoffs than like any team did the entire season, and they still lost the game. So I think that guy always gives you a shot. So I don't think that they're going to be like a 1 seed or a 2 seed in the AFC, but I still think that they're a playoff team, and I think that that's really all that matters.
I am campaigning for the Texans season opener to be the home game against the Bills. The Bills are on the Texans schedule. Brandon Beane didn't just not trade Stefon Diggs out of the conference. He traded them to a team that is on their schedule this year at NRG Stadium. So that game just got a whole lot more juice over the last 24 hours.
Yeah, it did. We talked about this on our podcast last night. The only thing that makes me think that that would be a little bit unlikely is the Bills have started their season with such high-profile games for 2 straight seasons. They played in the season opener against the Rams after the Rams won the Super Bowl, and then they played in the Monday night opener in Aaron Rodgers' first game against the Jets, where he played 4 plays before he got injured. I think that this Diggs game, the Diggs revenge game, has a little bit too much juice. And I feel like using it week 1 is not what the NFL would want to do. I think that this is something that they can kind of like put in the holster for week 7. It's like, okay, this will be the marquee matchup on Monday Night Football in week 7. I don't know. I don't see this is not meant to be a shot, but like, I don't know, would they really start the Bills at Texans as a primetime week 1 game? I don't know if I get that vibe.
I think I think it's got the chance to be 2 of the 3 or 4 best teams in the AFC playing. I think your point about it being sort of, keeping it as dry powder later in the season is a really good one, because that's a storyline that's independent of 1-loss records. Like that's a throw the records out the window kind of storyline. And I think the other thing too, is you kind of bring the Texans into this, is that I think the league still wants to kind of wait and see, make sure the Texan fans are all the way back, so that a Monday or Sunday night game in the week 1 isn't, we've had issues getting people into the stands, Matt, just so you know, here in Houston. It's got better as the season went on. But even CJ Stroud commented on it. He went to Ohio State, where there's 105,000 people sitting in the stadium 30 minutes before the game starts. This has been very eye-opening here to a lot of the guys that have come in during this era of Texans football, where it's been so bad that they're playing in front of half-empty stadiums. The stadium last year would generally fill up by like the end of the first quarter, but it hasn't been like Buffalo with the Mafia in there before the game, or Kansas City. I went to the Kansas City Buffalo game in the regular season a couple of years ago. That place is insane. And several other places. So I say all that to say your point is a really good one, because I think in addition to the Diggs storyline being record agnostic, I'll call it, is that I think the league wants to make sure I think the league wants to make sure that every Texans regular season game looks like the playoff game against Cleveland did, which CJ Stroud said was a better atmosphere than any that he played in at Ohio State.
Wow. That's fascinating for me to hear, just because like in Buffalo, it's the Bills and everything else is after that. It's just like the Bills are religion here. It's such a small market team. The team means so much. Every single game is full. And it's been that way since they were, 4-12 or 4-13, now that there's the extra game. So it's just interesting to hear that, because that's certainly not something that we're talking about here. But at the same time, I get it. It's a massive, massive, massive media market, sports market, where they got every pro team. So, they got a lot of things that they got to support there.
Yep, no doubt, no doubt. Matt Bove, it's always game day in Buffalo. Matt, tell the people where they can find the podcast, find you, all those things.
Yeah, so I'm the sports director at the ABC affiliate here in town, WKBW. But, if you've ever got any interest in following the Bills, it's always game day in Buffalo. I do that with the sideline reporter for the team, Sal Capaccio, and then on social media at Matt_Bove. Sean, I appreciate you having me.
Appreciate you coming on, Matt. Appreciate it, and enjoy the rest of the off season. And maybe we'll hook up when we find out when that Bills Texans game finally is. Maybe we'll talk down the road.
Perfect. Sounds great.
Appreciate you coming on, man. Thanks. That's Matt Bove of It's Always Game Day in Buffalo. All right, couple quick things here. So we led in with the interview. So I am going to share a few of my thoughts on the Diggs trade. This is my first opportunity to kind of lay things out on the Stefon Diggs trade yesterday. My big thoughts on the trade. First of all, I think that you got to look at the two trades as sort of one combined trade. The trade for all the trade with Minnesota, shuffling all that draft capital around, and then the trade on Wednesday for Stefon Diggs. These are really two transactions that are embedded in one another because the pick that went to Buffalo for Diggs was Minnesota's second-round pick next year in 2025. So I think there's a way that you can take the calculus of those two deals together. And while I think it's something that independently, just a trade for Diggs, I think Texan fans would be excited about, the fact that the asset you're using is from a trade a couple of weeks ago that I felt the Texans got the better of in that deal, in which they moved back from 23 to 42 in this coming draft and pick up that extra second-round pick. I don't think picking at 42 or 23 is drastically different in this draft, considering what the Texans' needs are. I think there's just as good a chance there's a player they really like at 42 as there would have been at 23. For me, they almost got Stefon Diggs for free because when you add everything up, really the net of the whole thing was they moved back 19 spots and got Stefon Diggs. And I don't feel strongly that moving back 19 spots is that detrimental. In addition, if you're just looking for a secondary reason why they won that collection of trades, that pairing of two trades, the Texans in the Minnesota trade gave up a 7th-round pick also. In the totality of the two deals, the Minnesota deal and the Diggs deal, they got back 2 6ths and a 5th over the next 2 years. So they augmented and improved their day 3 draft capital in each of the next 2 drafts and got Stefon Diggs merely for moving back 19 spots. I think that's the easiest way to boil it down. So I think Nick Caserio did a phenomenal job. He clearly went in with a plan. He was the one that initiated the calls with Minnesota to get that train moving. And then obviously I feel like Diggs is somebody that's been on their target for a while. I think he fits exactly what D'Amico Ryans has described he looks for in a receiver. The ability to separate, the ability to move the chains, the ability to win third down. No mention at all of got to run a 4.4. I'm looking for 6'3", 230 or anything like that. D'Amico and Nick Caserio got what they wanted in Stefon Diggs. I think the interesting things will be to see how does Diggs handle sharing. You know, how is he with having the same number of targets as guys like Nico Collins and Tank Dell, maybe at times fewer targets. And I think that all plays into the storyline of how does he fit into this locker room. I do think this locker room, starting with the head coach and then moving on to the quarterback, and then the several other strong personalities in that locker room on either side of the ball. Jimmy Ward, Will Anderson on defense, not just CJ on offense, but some of the other guys who are captains, even Robert Woods, who will be in the same receiving room as Stefon Diggs. There's a lot of leadership in that building at NRG. I don't think you need 53 leaders on a team. I think you need a handful of leaders and then a bunch of guys that probably need to be led. Some need to be led more than others. Stefon Diggs may be one of those guys. I just know the guy's really good at football, and the Texans, I think, have the wherewithal to take on that personality. As mercurial as it may be, they've got the wherewithal to do that. Here's the thing. I look at best case and worst case scenario with everything in life. And I think the worst case scenario here is that Stefon Diggs is a similar disruptor behind the scenes that he was in Buffalo. And I truly feel if that's the case, then CJ Stroud is the one who holds the power. If CJ Stroud can handle Stefon Diggs being in his huddle and in his locker room, Stefon Diggs will be a Texan. If CJ Stroud says, we don't need this, we got Nico, Tank, Dalton Schultz, the juice ain't worth the squeeze, then Stefon Diggs will be gone. And at that point, the only really sunken cost in my mind is whatever you paid him salary-wise. Because I don't really feel strongly like the Texans gave up a whole lot to get that second-round pick that they used to get Diggs in the first place. So I feel like the risk is low in terms of what the sunken cost could be. The best case scenario is you've just created the second coming of the greatest show on turf. You've got Stefon Diggs, who's been a Pro Bowler the last 4 years. You've got Nico Collins, who could have easily been a Pro Bowler last year. And then you got Tank Dell, who may end up being the best out of the three of them at some point. I know CJ Stroud seems to sure feel like Tank Dell has the potential to be at that Diggs level. So I mean, and then you had Joe Mixon. You've got a tight end in Dalton Schultz. The offensive line, I think you're hoping for health and that they get the interior straightened out. That's still, I think, the big question mark. It's really your only question mark on offense, other than how is Diggs going to blend into the locker room, and what are they going to do in the draft, to build some depth. But this has the potential to be a dynamite offense. I have no idea which of the three to take in fantasy. Tank, Nico, Diggs, no idea. It's a fair debate. Maybe I'll put it up on a Pender poll on social media. But those are my thoughts. If just in a vacuum, if you said the Texans are going to trade for Stefon Diggs, I would probably, without knowing what the compensation was going to be, I probably would have said no, because there's other solutions out there. And I would have expected the draft compensation to be more than the Texans gave up. For what they gave up, I'm cool with it, because they can punt on it if it doesn't work. And if it does work, holy smokes, your season tickets just got a whole lot more worth it if you're a Texan fan. And by worth it, I mean, keep your season tickets, worth it the experience. Don't sell them, and especially don't sell them to Buffalo and Chicago fans and everybody else, all right? That's my PSA for this podcast. All right, so those are my thoughts on Diggs. We're going to continue to break that down. The Texans, who knows what the next holy shit moment is coming around the corner from Nick Caserio. I don't know that they've got the powder left, the dry powder salary cap-wise, to make another big move. I think if I were asking Texan fans out there, what would they like to see as the next big move? I think there's a lot of people. Justin Simmons at safety is one that I think Texan fans would like to see. I think the Texans are supremely confident, even if maybe they shouldn't be, in Jalen Petrie and Jimmy Ward. Jalen Petrie underperformed last year, and Jimmy Ward couldn't stay healthy. I think they love both those guys. So I don't know that they're going to go balls to the wall expensive, which is like Justin Simmons relative to what's out there on the market would probably be expensive. But I think interior defensive line, cornerback, not quarterback, cornerback, interior D-line, cornerback. I think they could still use another running back, veteran running back. Probably wouldn't be a bad idea. And then maybe another veteran tight end. But I mean, this roster is when you add in the fact that they're going to draft 6, 7, 8 guys in a month or in 3 weeks, pretty solidified right now. Way more solidified than it's been over the last couple of years at this juncture. So exciting time to be a Texan fan. Quick reminder on a couple of things. If you want to send me in a question for the mailbag episode, houmailbag@gmail.com is the email address. Your questions on the Diggs trade, your questions on the offseason, the upcoming draft. This is a great time to send in mailbag questions. I do the mailbag every Tuesday, so make a note, houmailbag@gmail.com. If you got a thought on your mind, send it right now. Also a reminder, subscribe, rate, and review. Love when you do that. If you're listening to the podcast, you're new to the podcast, click that subscribe button, and you'll get the podcast automatically. So we're going to have a lot of good coverage of the Texans, not only up through the draft, but throughout the summer months as well, leading up to training camp and the Hall of Fame game. Texans will get started with training camp early, so that'll be cool as well. So yeah, subscribe, give us a rating, a review. We appreciate that. Big thanks to Matt Bove of It's Always Game Day in Buffalo for joining me on here. Big thanks to Anthony Irwin, our producer, who gets the podcast out in a timely fashion twice a week to each and every one of you. So till next week, I am Stefon Pendergast. We are out of time. You can listen to me on Payne and Pendergast, 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. on Sports Radio 610 and the Odyssey app. Until then, have a great weekend, everybody.